Okay, this is an interesting job. This camera came to me like this. Retina Ia. Someone had decided they needed to strip it down and service the shutter, but they didn't have the bell jan tool, and so they came up with a cunning way to remove the shutter. As you can see, the inner part of the helical is still attached to the shutter. The only way this reasonably could have been achieved is for the guide posts in the back here to have been removed. Now, there are 4 screws visible in here, up, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom, and they hold the guide rails in place. Now, the guide rail's job is to keep the inner helical from rotating. So the inner helical cannot rotate. When you rotate the outer helical with the focus lever, that causes the inner helical to move forward or backwards in the outer. Anyway, those rails must have been removed, which allows the inner helical and the shutter attached to be rotated and unscrewed from the body. Now, how would you go about putting something like this back together? Well, this is the puzzle. So obviously the guide rails are going to have to come out. That's easy enough. But then I've got to see if I can get this in the correct position and rotate it back into the original position so that it'll focus again. Now, one complication here is that while we're trying to get this shutter lined back up with the helical, which is awkward enough a task anyway, somehow we've got to organise it so that we synchronise the coupling of the cocking mechanism here to the curved rack and the shutter here. Now that is close enough to impossible as far as I can tell. So what I'm going to attempt is I'm going to remove the housing here, lift that gear out completely so that we're not trying to couple the shutter and the shutter to the cocking rack at the same time we're trying to get the helical back in, and then see if I can rotate this shutter back into its original position. One possible complication, extra complication, is this little tab here. Now that little tab runs in a slot in the top of the mount here, and I think it could be quite entertaining trying to get that down into position and rotate the shutter all at the same time. But that's what I'm going to attempt to achieve. So you can watch and see how I get on. Right, let's start taking this thing apart. So what I'm going to do is remove this and remove these 2 guide posts and see if we can rotate the shutter into position. So 2 screws here. They're chrome screws, fairly easily scarred. Be careful with your screwdriver. So remove those components, put them to one side. Now open the back of the camera, and there are 4 screws, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom, and I'll need to have those out. I'm not sure you'll see any of this because it's like the black hole of Calcutta down there. I can't see very much myself. That's 1 rail and it's 2 screws. see if I can get the other one. Oh, it doesn't want to close up. That's because the shaft that drives the cocking mechanism for the shutter flops about when it's not supported at the front and catches underneath the front standard. Is any of this on the camera or just a little bit? Sorry about that. Alright. Here we go. So now the guideposts are gone, the cocking mechanism is gone, and if this is going to work, this is where we would do it. We'd start at the closest focus position where the shutter will be racked out as far as possible to the front. Now our complication, and this may stymie us completely here, is this little tab. That's on this bracket, and that bracket's job is that bracket is secured to the inner helical with a couple of screws. It's keyed to the shutter with a single screw here. That's screw head. And that's to prevent the shutter from being able to rotate in the mount. Means that all the work's not being done by the shutter, retaining ring. That load has been taken up by that screw in that bracket. I think that this tab sticks out too far. I believe that when this was forcibly unscrewed from the helical, that this tab sprang back out of the way, or was forced back out of the way. Excuse me, the phone's just ringing. No, it stopped ringing by the time I got back to the phone. It was probably the Indian scammers anyway. Right, back to where I was. Yes, I believe that this tab was forced, sprang back out of the way when it was forced. I don't think that it's achievable. Anyway, let's have a go. There's a slot in the focus ring. That tab must drop down into it. You can see it sticks out proud of the helical, or very close to the same level as it. So by the time the helical started, that's going to be contacting something. Let's have a go at this. So focus position close as possible. This has to rotate in anti-clockwise, and we'll see if we can pick up those helical threads. They may be slightly burred over from whatever abuse they've suffered, in which case it'll be awkward. Here I can, it's not quite picking them up. I think we'd need to be able to start the shutter right over this position in order to get that to go, and that tab will most definitely not allow that. I think the best we can do is start it about here, and I don't believe that's going to do the job. Right, the helical started, but even shifting the focus position back to the infinity position you can see that the shutter is not pulled far back enough into the mount. And at the closest position, and here I'm stopping this from rotating so that it pushes forward, you can see that there's a big gap behind the shutter. So it's more than one helical position out, I would say. And I can't see how that can possibly be remedied while this tab is in place. That being the case, we'll have to remove the retaining ring as originally should have been done before this shutter somebody tried to take this apart. Now there are two ways to achieve this. One is using a bell jan tool or something very similar to it, and I'm sure you've seen these on my website, and that would fit in, drop into the slots in the retaining ring and loosen up like that. Now the reason the person got into this mess in the first place is that they didn't have a spanner like this, and decided they would come up with their own cunning plan. Let's see if we can get that off. I'll just roll that retaining ring off. That would allow us to take this whole piece off. That, I believe, cannot be screwed back in there because this tab is going to always foul that position. It must have been pushed well forward, sprung well forward. It's not even square. That angle's not even square, so I can tell that's been bent. Anyway, let's put this back on the shutter and see what other method they could have used. Put that back into position. Start that retaining ring. On the Retina Ia and the Retina, what other retinas? The 1B in particular, they use the Xenar lenses typically, and one of the characteristics of the Xenar lens is that the rear group is smaller and fits well down into the shutter. With the 2A or the 2C and 3C, that rear grip protrudes through, and it acts as a guide on the inside of this tool, which helps keep this aligned when you're trying to unscrew things, which makes using this spanner much easier on the 2 and 3 models. Okay, so what else could they have done? If I look in here now, and mind you, we can only achieve this because this has been removed from the camera, you can see the edge of the retaining ring quite easily there. Now there's two methods, one good method will do that, and I'll go and get the tool for that now. Right, back with some tools. Here are our choices. This is a traditional lens spanner. It's got some flat bladed tips on there, it's fairly small ones, and something like this would probably do the job. Again, only since the shutter's been removed, because these cannot fit down through the throat of the camera. So you pop that in the slot. Get out the correct width, do up my screws and twist it, and it just rotates that ring, no problem. Your alternative, which if you don't have any special tools you can use, is a pair of needle nose pliers. Now these ones have had the tips suitably mutilated, and you might see they come up to quite a sharp blade at the end. Now they're made to do this job as well. And because that ring's loose, you can see how easy that was. But that sort of tool will also do the job. There are other options. You could make a whole new spanner up to do the job. But a tool like this is pretty much essential if you're going to try and do it while it's in the camera. If on the 1A, this is a Retina 1A, on the 1A you can see in the back of the camera and you can actually see the retaining ring and you can see those grooves. You can get into it with a tool somewhat like this, depending on where it happens to be rotated relative to the opening. If it's top and bottom, it's very hard to get at. If it's almost diagonal, you can expand your pliers out this way and reach them and you'll be able to turn them. You've only got to break that seal and then you can rotate it with the screwdriver to remove that ring completely. Anyway, with this particular job, what we're going to do is remove the retaining ring, and I believe this will be necessary for anyone who's managed to get themselves into this position. I think removing those rear guides and forcing the shutter to unscrew from the helical is a one-way process, that it will not go back the other way. Right, so we can remove these two screws from this ring. And then we've got to reassemble the helical. Now all I know for sure is that this is the upper part of where that thing sat. When it was in the infinity position, that would be quite close. Now, there are marks. There's an alignment mark scratched here, and there's one on the ring scratched here. There's another one there for good measure too, but these two seem to be at the same angle. They're alignment marks, either made in the factory, much more likely made during servicing, and they would have been set at some useful position, usually infinity, or alternatively they would have been set where the lens, where the inner and outer helical were dead level, so that when you disassembled the helical you could get it back into the same position. See if I can get this thing started and rotated. Well, there's my alignment marks. Now the helical's only half started there, so I'm a couple of positions out. Go around a bit more. That's just lifting out, so we want to start it somewhere there perhaps. This is a trial and error process and you can rotate it a little bit at a time. Now that is looking quite promising. That was at the top. At that position there, where my inner helical is virtually up and straight up and down, that surfaces are almost level. See if I can get that around a bit more. It's a bit stuck. I didn't quite want to go down there. I think that we're one position out. Let's try setting it back the other way. So I think that was down too far. Let's try starting it here. At the infinity position, the inner helical should be no higher than the outer helical, because otherwise this ring would stop it from being able to pull back into the infinity position. Well, that's definitely sitting high there. It's possible that the focus control ring has been forced around on the outer helical too. That's certainly an option. Let's see, here we go. All I know for sure is that somebody had taken the front off the shutter out of the camera. What they did once the shutter was removed is a bit of a mystery. Could be anything. Most definitely not. Getting multi-start threads to pick up is always entertaining. I believe that sticks up too high, and I believe it has to come back one position. Let's have a go. It might just do it. Right, let's put this plate back on. And it does still fit. 2 tiny screws for this. What I'm interested in checking now is that the focus control ring swings through its complete range. Now if I hold that straight up and down it will. It looks reasonable. Now we've got to put the guide rails back in place. Focus ring has to be at infinity to close the front, of course, that's fine. This could be fun because those guide rails can be bent, and if they are bent, getting them to line back up correctly is very awkward. In fact, I'd even say that it's probable that they're bent, given that I don't believe the shutter came out without a fair bit of pushing and shoving. Right. If these guides are disturbed, or you'll disturb their alignment, and although they look pretty plain and boring, if the alignment is disturbed slightly, you tend to find that the shutter won't roll out smoothly. That looks pretty promising to me. I'll get that second screw in place. This shaft is causing me grief. Let's peel it. And I'll put the other rail in place. and then I'll see if the thing still goes. Back in a minute. Right, well I got those two guide rails back in position and the screws are in. They're not exactly tight, but you can see that the focus swings through its normal range, and I'm quite happy that that's probably as good as I'm going to get that at the moment. Let's get this cocking rack back into the position, or the cocking shaft rather. That has to drop over the shaft from the rear of the camera, of course, so I'm just lining that up. It flops around a bit when it's not supported at the front. Being careful not to poke my tweezers through the bellows because that's generally undesirable. There we go. No, we're not connected. If I had the camera stripped down to service, this particular task would have been done, that's better, without the door attached, which would make it much easier to see what I'm doing, of course. We'll drop that cover, that shroud or barrel or whatever they happen to call it, in the parts book, if you had a parts book, back in place. 2 chrome screws. That one's easy enough, you can see it. The other one is down on the inside there. It's awkward to see, it's awkward to position, and it's easy to drop. On the 3C type cameras, if you drop it and it falls in behind the bellows, that's going to cause you grief. At least on this, the 2A and 1A, you'll be able to shake the thing loose. Okay, so that focus is stiff, but the focus was probably stiff anyway. That helical probably needed cleaned. And the task at hand is to put the shutter back in position as it should have been. Right, so what we're going to do now is couple it, the shutter to here, get that timed correctly. So I'm bringing the focus out to the close focus position so I can see the position of that cam. Rotate that and the shutter doesn't fire. So I need to advance the position of the curved rack a tooth and try again. I've returned that to the infinity position. Again, the shutter didn't fire. Advance that another tooth. Here we go. So at that position, that's all working. That cocks the shutter nicely. And we're back to the job as it should have been done. With a retaining ring in place and the bell jam tool or something very similar used to screw that back down into place. So, what have we learnt from this? Well, the first thing I've learnt is that I had a fair idea how the shutter had been, shutter assembly had been removed from the body. It was not the approved method, and that it looks to be a one-way process. It could be taken apart that way only by forcing things and causing things to be sprung back out of position. It meant that it was a one-way process and that it was virtually impossible to force those pieces back out of the way while you tried to reinsert that multi-start helical thread. So, faced with the job again, what would I have done? Knowing that you can't go about doing it in the reverse to the way they'd taken the thing apart in the first place, the problem basically was the outer helical, the guide rails. I should not have bothered to take those off. There was no need for that. It didn't get me anywhere useful. Likewise, I didn't need to take this barrel off, or this support for the cocking shaft. That didn't get me anywhere useful either. The only useful thing was using the Belgian tool or pliers or something more traditional like the shutter wrench here to remove the retaining ring from the back of the shutter, freeing up that inner helical so that I could take the plate off the front of the inner helical, get the inner helical back in position, and then we was in business really. Trying to think that one through. Yes, probably in order to achieve that without any further trouble, either the guide rails had to come off, where they were in the case when I was doing it, or more realistically, you would have taken the 4 screws out of the focus ring, mark its position on the outer helical, then remove that, then get your inner helical back in position. With the focus control ring missing or removed, would allow you to rotate the outer helical continuously, which would mean that you could rotate it further around this way, get your inner helical go back in, turn the inner helical so it lined up with the guide rails, and then rotate it back into the infinity position. Anyway, that's a messy job. That's what happens if people dismantle a retina and they do it in a new and an imaginative way. So if you've done something like this, I'm afraid you're still going to be stuck looking for a tool like this, or a pair of pliers suitably mutilated like this, or a tool like this to dig you out of trouble, and you've still got to put the thing back together in the correct fashion. Thank you. I've had a chance to check the camera now and see if the focus at infinity was correct, and surprise, surprise, it wasn't. The shutter is too far back in the body. Now, there's a couple of possibilities there. I may have reassembled the helical incorrectly and it's one notch out, or alternatively the focus setting ring had been moved on the outer helical. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and thinking about it, I think that's quite possibly what's happened. When I received the camera, it came in 2 pieces. The shutter was separate from the body. The inner helical was still attached to the back of the shutter. But I had made the assumption that the focus setting ring had never been disturbed from the outer helical. Now, it occurs to me that another way of pulling this thing apart when you're using brute force and ignorance would be to rack the shutter out to its furthermost position. Hold the shutter very firmly to stop it going back. Force the focus ring back towards the infinity position, effectively moving it on the outer helical. And then as you shift the focus ring back to the close focus position, it would pop the shutter, complete with its inner helical, out of the outer helical and free of the camera. And I wonder whether that is what's been done here instead. That would mean that the position of the focus scale ring on the outer helical is just an accident. It just happens to be where it was put back by whoever had been into the camera and made a mess of the job. That being quite a strong possibility, I'm now going to take a very close look and see if there are any alignment marks there that may have indicated that position beforehand. And I don't see any scratches at all on the focus scale ring. I'm going to delve into this a bit deeper. So we'll remove that front piece. I'll remove the 4 screws. I'll mark the position of that focus helical, where it is at the moment, just for reference. I'll remove the 4 screws that hold it, hold the adjustment. These screws hold the focus scale ring to the outer helical. They're just countersunk headed screws, quite small, and with enough force you'd be able to shift things. Let's take those off, and now I'm having a look to see what I can see about mark. Now there is definitely a mark there. This is where the head of the screw was that I've just removed. There's a mark on the ring right there. There are multiple marks around here, and there's a mark shifted by exactly the same amount over here, which suggests to me that that focus ring had been shifted, and quite possibly that's why it no longer is no longer focused at infinity correctly, and that's something I'm going to have to investigate now, I think. However, this camera is due to be completely stripped down for service, so I'll probably delve into that during that process. If I'm correct with my second suggestion, that the shutter was removed from the camera not by removing the rails from the back and simply twisting it out, forcing this tab out past the slot, but was in fact removed from the camera by racking the lens to the closest focus position, holding it firmly to stop it moving backwards, forcing the focus ring back towards the infinity position, and then pushing that again back to the close focus position, possibly multiple times, probably only once might have done it, and that would push the helical out. So one of those two methods has been used. I don't think I'll ever know for sure. Whichever method it was, it certainly involved using force, and generally speaking you don't need to do that if you're using the correct tools. Although having said that, a correct tool like this often needs to be supplemented with a spanner like this to apply force anyway. Right, thank you. Yes, I've been away now and checked the focus after adjusting the position of the focus ring on the outer helical to align it with the marks I'd seen on there, and checked the focus afterwards, and the focus is spot on. So that means that the position of the focus ring on the outer helical had certainly been disturbed before I got the camera, and so it's anyone's guess as to what exactly had happened there. Right, I suppose now I better finish doing start doing a proper service on the camera. Completely strip it down and get it back into proper working order. At the moment the focus is very, very stiff. Thank you.